All right, hi everyone. It's 6 p.m., so we'll get started now. Welcome and thank you for taking the time to join the City of Kingston's first engagement session for the Ronald Lavallee Memorial Kiwanis Park improvements. I'm Courtney Klumper, a communications officer from the City of Kingston, and I'll be moderating tonight's session. Behind the scenes tonight, we also have Heather Brown, who will be our technical producer this evening. Before we get started this evening and we introduce our panel, I have a couple of housekeeping items to share. First off, this session is live streamed to YouTube and recorded. To protect your privacy, all participants have their video turned off and have been muted, and the chat functionality in Zoom is turned off. Next, we know that sometimes technology troubles happen. There's a list of common challenges on Get Involved Kingston, including what to do if your audio or video aren't working. Please note that you're able to adjust your view options so that you can see both the presentation and the members of the project team at the same time. If your internet connection goes down, you can also call into the meeting at the number on this screen. The number is 613-453-5818, and the webinar ID is 862-8095-7445. I'll leave this slide up for a minute in case you'd like to write it down. If you're still having trouble joining, you can also follow live on YouTube where this session is closed captioned. We will also do our best to help you with any technical problems, but sometimes the easiest way to resolve it is to log out of Zoom and rejoin the meeting. And you can do that using the link you received in the registration confirmation email. So today we're going to provide a question and answer period following the presentation. If you have a question at any point during the presentation, you can use the Q&A feature, and I will hold your question until the question period. The Q&A feature can be found on the bar across the bottom of your screen. So to ask a question, simply type into that question area. You're also welcome to raise your hand to speak and ask a question during the Q&A. To do this, please use the raise hand function that can be found also on the bottom toolbar. I will be monitoring for this and will acknowledge you and then turn on your microphone so you can ask a question or make a comment. If you're calling in tonight and would like to raise your hand, you can press *9. So on your screen now, you should see our guidelines for participation. If you've joined us before for an engagement session, they may look familiar to you. These guidelines for participation were developed as part of the city's public engagement framework to make sure that we can all join together, be respectful, and be open to each other's ideas. So I'm going to leave these up for about 30 seconds so you have an opportunity to read them. If there are any concerns about the guidelines, please let me know by using the raise hand function. Okay, thank you. Seeing no objections, we'll proceed into this online engagement session. And I'm now going to pass this presentation over to Shanda Sames, who is the Parks and Open Space Coordinator.
Thanks, Courtney. Welcome everyone to this public engagement session on the improvements of Ronald Lavallee Memorial Kiwanis Park. As Courtney has mentioned, I'm the Parks and Open Space Coordinator in Parks and Shoreline Engineering Services. Also joining us on the panelists is Neil Unsworth, Manager of Parks and Shoreline, Kevin Holmes from MBTW. He's a landscape architect from the Toronto area who will be leading the design and the presentation later on tonight. I also wanted to extend a special welcome to Councillor Tozo, who is in attendance in tonight's session. Before I hand it over to Kevin, I just wanted to explain that this project or improvement, we've been fortunate enough to receive some additional funding from the Hannah Washburn Neil Curry Olson Trust. This fund is to help improve landscapes in parks. Beautify landscapes in parks. Now I'll hand it over to Kevin to present the project.
Thank you, Shanda, and good evening, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Kevin Holmes. I'm a principal with the MBTW group in Toronto. And just so you know, we have a tremendous amount of experience in these types of park redevelopment projects. So we're really pleased to work with city staff to develop a really unique design that'll enhance what the existing park offers currently. So tonight we're going to touch on the project schedule. We'll talk about our analysis of the site and provide you with certainly some opportunities and mention a few constraints. Then we're going to present some conceptual layout plans that we've prepared just for some initial feedback. And then at the end, we'll entertain some questions. Next slide, please. So we're currently in the initial phase. Obviously, the initial phase is sort of getting us to understand what the opportunities and the constraints are within the property. So we've prepared a topographic base plan. We had an opportunity to walk the site, the park block, with city staff, including their operations department, which is really critical to these type of redevelopment projects. And then based on our site walk, we prepared what we call an opportunities and a constraints plan that really identifies the strengths and the weaknesses, and in keeping into consideration what the scope of work as defined by the city is. And then once that was prepared, then we put pen to paper and prepared a couple of options for facility fits, for lack of a better word. And those are going to be presented this evening. I mean, obviously, we're holding, the open house yesterday, this online discussion today, in the hope that we can, solicit feedback from a lot of area residents about the initial park plans. And coming out of this, we're looking to secure a preferred park option and then present that preferred option with some playground equipment design options at a second open house, which is going to occur in a month or 2 months down the road. Once that has been done and we've received the feedback on the preferred concept and the playground equipment, then it's up to us then to do construction drawings, so more detailed park drawings. And the thought is that we would prepare those and finalize those with the tender documents at the end of this year, so that construction in the park could commence as early as 2025. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the park context. Obviously, it's an established park, sort of a central civic square within the Kings Court neighborhood. It's a very large park at 1.3 hectares. It has an existing school to the north, and it has a well-defined and well-established community around all areas of the park. And obviously, this park fronts onto 4th Avenue, and it is just a short 5 to 10 minute walk to other open spaces, which are located to the west, the 3rd Avenue Park, as well as the Oak Street Park. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the existing amenities within the park, they include a number of things. We've got a playground. You can see on the images that there's a play structure, which is in a pea gravel play surface, which isn't ideal. That playground is obviously a little aging. And there's also 2 smaller sand pits that have some older swing sets in it. There's a splash pad, which I understand was a converted wading pool into the splash pad, which is located sort of in the front left side of the front west side of the park. We have a tennis court, which is located at the very southwest corner of the park. Further to the north, we have a junior softball diamond and a junior baseball diamond, which we understand are very popular for junior baseball. There is an unused park building. That photograph on the lower right corner of this slide shows the size of the unused park building, which sort of blocks a lot of views into the park from the street. And then we've also got a number of existing mature trees, some along the 4th Avenue frontage, and then some that sort of create separation north of the splash pad, between the splash pad and the softball diamond. Next slide, please. So the project scope that was provided to us by the city contains a number of improvements. The first is to replace the existing aging play equipment. And you can see from the slides that some of that is certainly been in existence for a while. To improve the pedestrian connectivity and the accessibility within the park, and to consider future connections, to 4th Avenue, as well as potentially in the future to the school to the north. The replacement of the unused building with a new community gathering space, which will contain, a fairly large shade structure with some site furnishings. So by removal of that park building, that will free up a lot of space, what we feel would be more suited for, a community gathering area. As well, there'll be some minor sports field and tennis court enhancements. We've got some drainage issues. We've got fencing, backstop fencing that needs to be replaced. So depending on the budget, we'll see how much of that can get done, but that is certainly within our scope so far. And then enhancing the park by, adding additional tree planting. And that is obviously funded in part by the Hannah Washburn Neil Curry Polson Trust. So we appreciate that. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, we prepared an opportunities and a constraints plan for the site. And quite often, a lot of what we find and identify as opportunities and constraints really direct our conceptual design development for the park. So some of the opportunities, obviously, we've identified that there's an opportunity to improve the visibility into the park. So both views into the park, but views out from the park, and that will improve the safety. They always say that eyes from the street is always very important to improve safety in parks. There's an opportunity obviously to improve the connection and the accessibility. Some of the playgrounds, as we identified, are made of materials that are not highly accessible. Another opportunity to retain the existing mature trees around the site. And there's some memorial trees within the park that we would want to make sure that we take care of. Some of the constraints would include, a steep slope along the park frontage, the presence of, underlying rock, which in the Kingston area, I'm sure most people are familiar that there's often rock at the surface. Between the uses, there's potential conflict. So between the baseball and any play areas that we have defined, we want to make sure that we maintain appropriate setbacks between the uses. And then the other constraint is just the age or the condition of the existing play equipment. Next slide, please. So this is just some photographs of what some of the site opportunities. In the top left, we have some beautiful mature trees. We have the bottom left corner, that slide of the existing park building. Obviously, the visibility into the park is hindered by that, so we'll create a safer space by the removal of that building. We've got one of the best opportunities is just the size of the park and the fact that we have a tremendous amount of opportunities to improve landscaping, planting trees, but offering areas for kids, groups, families to come and actually just enjoy the green space. And then we've got an existing, several existing recreational facilities, tennis, which, is gaining popularity again. And so we want to make sure that we enhance those. And these are some of the constraints in the next slide. The presence of underlying limestone, the steep slope along the park's frontage, and the inaccessibility and aging play equipment and the surfacing. Next slide, please. So once we really kind of understood the property in the park, we put pen to paper, as I mentioned, and developed a couple of different options. Now, I want to make sure that people understand, because I know this comment came up last night, that although this only shows one baseball diamond, the park actually is extending all the way to the existing boundary to the north that includes the other ball field. So please don't be alarmed by just seeing this part of the park. The park is staying in the same shape. The only thing that changes between the two different concepts that we've prepared is really the location of the proposed amenities, and that's going to differ. And I'll walk you through how we've sort of modified or changed the changed amenities within the park block itself. Next slide, please. So concept plan A shows a centrally located park plaza where the existing park building is, and sort of a gathering space, rectangular in shape with a rectangular shade structure. The playground is positioned in the right side or the east side, southeast corner of the park block, kind of in the same location as where the existing swings are. Obviously, the existing tennis courts and the splash pad are in, those have not changed locations, but we're providing access, a trail that enters the park at the current location in the southeast corner, comes along the park frontage, and then ties into all the amenities. So it would tie into the play area, it would tie into the plaza with the shade structure, and then it would continue on to the tennis court. So we're improving the accessibility through and the circulation through the park. Next slide, please. Well, one thing I forgot to mention in this concept, the existing stairs, which are sort of along the frontage of the park, would be maintained. Now, park concept B picks up on one of the unique features of the park, and that's the hexagon theme established by the existing splash pad. So the hexagon-shaped gathering area has been designed in that same form, and it's again located between the existing splash pad and what we would consider the new playground to the right of that, and that's also shaped as a hexagon. So the park entry on the southeast corner of the park has been maintained, although it's been shifted slightly. But we've provided another park entry along the southwest corner. And I think that this makes sense because, anybody that's coming to the site that walks from west to east along 4th, if you have a stroller or a child in a wheelchair, you're almost obligated to go all the way down to the east side of the park. So we just think from a circulation perspective that this makes a lot of sense to have a park entry on the west side. One thing I forgot to mention in the previous plan as well as this one, is that we're proposing to plant trees as a continuation of that, grouping of trees, just to create a little bit more separation, between the existing ball field and any future plans. And then there's also a large open play area to this sort of the southeast corner, which would be maintained for informal play, for lack of a better word. Next slide, please. So these are just some photographs of some precedent images that, that would sort of reinforce the vision for what we're proposing. So we've got at the top left a plaza with a shade structure with benches or picnic tables below. Tree planting in the lower left corner. We've got accessible pathways. Obviously, the pathways would be, asphalt material. They'd probably be a little bit wider than currently in the park just because of accessibility issues. And then we've got maintained open green space. Next slide, please. Now, what we did on this slide, obviously, I think a bulk of the emphasis of this park redevelopment is in terms of playground upgrades. So what we've done is we've sort of shown on this slide just some images of what potentially could be put in place on this playground. So we've got a fairly large play structure in the top left, and I believe that is from the 4th or 3rd Avenue playground. But there's a lot of other options. There's climbers, there's slides, spring animals, swings. So we certainly would like your feedback for any play related equipment. Next slide, please. So this is kind of the end of my presentation, but it's really important to know that the city is really, really hopeful that, that the public will provide some feedback on what they'd like to see within the park. There is an online survey, which I understand is open currently, and it will remain open until April the 4th. And in our meeting, a public meeting yesterday, we had an opportunity for any residents that were there to provide us with some written feedback. So in terms of the feedback, next slide, please. What we're really looking for is your feedback on what is the preference for the park layout. Are we looking at plan A or plan B? And quite often it may be a combination of things. I like this part on plan A, but I like the circulation better on plan B. So keep that in mind, but please provide feedback on that. Next slide. As well as as a resident, what do you most value about the park? And there's an opportunity to provide some feedback on what you like about the park. And then finally, our last slide is what playground features are your favorite? Okay, so any input? I know yesterday at the public open house, there was a lot of comments about different suppliers providing different options for play equipment. So we'd certainly appreciate hearing from you on that. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for attending. Obviously, we'll like to, if there's any questions in the audience, we'd like to answer them for you.
Okay, thanks, Kevin, for that great presentation. And now we'll move into our question and answer session. So to join in, you're welcome to add your questions into the Q&A and I'll read them out. I see we have one in there already. You're also welcome to raise your hand. Heather and I will be watching for this and let you know when it's time to unmute and ask your question. On the off chance that we don't get to all of the questions tonight, please know that we will answer all of your questions on our Get Involved page. And as Kevin mentioned, there is an online survey available until April 4th to add any additional comments you might have. Okay, so let's get started. First question is from Elizabeth. I'm most concerned about the playground equipment. Across the city, we lack unique playground equipment. It tends to be low to the ground and does not support risky play recommended by the Canadian Pediatric Society. How do you intend to incorporate risky play into the design of playground equipment? Thanks, Elizabeth, for that question. I don't know, Kevin or Neil?
Neil, do you want me to? I can answer if you like. I think I mentioned yesterday at the public open house that what we typically do is once we sort of establish the preferred concept and we have the play equipment or the playground area defined, we usually send that out to a number of different playground suppliers, and we give them the budget, we give them the area, and then it's up to them to sort of create these designs that we will then take and present to you, and then get your feedback on that at the next step. Neil, do you have anything to add? Or Shanda?
Well, I do kind of want to add that we are balancing like the what people want in terms of level of risk versus accessibility needs, because sometimes accessibility needs to be lower to the ground. So there will be like a mix. There are certain standards that we have to adhere to when designing those playgrounds. And what we used to be able to do back in the day, where we could jump from level to level and make it more risky, has a lot more constraints and more factors to be factored in. Just something so you're aware.
Yeah, thanks, Shanda. I think that's a fair assessment that the modern play equipment follows modern guidelines, and so it is done a bit differently. That being said, there are some really exciting elements that some of the participants in the meeting last night told us about, that certainly give that risky play experience and that elevation, that quite significant elevation opportunity for kids in playgrounds. Obviously, there's a site constraint. It's not a very big park, and the play equipment can only be so large before it would take over all the lawn space. So we'll have to be realistic about that. But I do think we've heard about cargo net climbers and tower climbers that could potentially be mixed into some of the more traditional product that a lot of other residents do also have an interest in. So we might see that come out of our feedback from residents, that could be a possible option.
Okay, thanks everyone. Our next question is from Molly, who asks, what about bathrooms? Will there be some included? So far, there's only one at the far end of the field.
Neil, do you want to tackle this one about the future?
Yeah, sorry, Shanda might be able to add a little more, but so the answer is yes. There are portalettes provided for the sports experience on the ball diamonds, so that's not supposed to change. What we do think we will do is preserve the old sewer line connection to the park, so that in the future, should this site be awarded an upgrade for a public washroom, even a really small sort of brick and mortar public washroom, that it would be sort of cheaper at a later time to add that. And I know the city says sometimes that we might do it later in a future phase, but the reality is that there's a lot of interest in park washrooms, and we think we're likely going to be putting something in front of council to talk about future potential park enhancements, raising that level of service, of which park washrooms is one of those things that we hear about in 2025. And then there might be at that point a decision about where the park washrooms or any new park washrooms need to be added in the city. But because they're quite expensive, they can't go in every one of our 230 parks. But just in case this park was earmarked for a washroom in the future, at least we would have sort of the water line, the sewer line, the electrical all there ready to go. But at this point, a permanent washroom isn't part of the scope. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Neil. So Elizabeth has another question. Will one of the design types considered be a nature playground?
We can take it into consideration, but in reality, usually nature playgrounds are more expensive than the traditional, so you might get a little less for your buck for similar things. And also the maintenance costs for these nature playgrounds are a lot higher over time. So we tend to try to limit where they go. Usually we prefer to put those in more like a natural environment. If there's like a natural, I don't know, environmental protection area that's close by or woodlot, it feels like it fits more better in the environment in those situations.
Okay, thanks, Shanda. So I have just a comment from Sam. No question, just would love to see something different than what's at 3rd Street or the school. Tower climber sounds fun. So thanks, Sam. Appreciate that feedback. And we have no other open questions at the moment, but we'll leave it open for a minute in case anything else comes up. If you're like me and you think of things after the fact when you're mulling, you can always reach out to Shanda or add in any feedback in the survey on Get Involved Kingston. Go for it, Neil.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to raise my hand in Zoom. I can do a smile emoji here too. I see in the chat a resident by the name of Molly was asking about accessibility in the playground. Can she just drop something? If you're still there, Molly, can you just drop that in the a little more elaborate a little bit on that question, because we have a lot of knowledge and experience about accessibility in playgrounds, and there is another initiative that I wouldn't mind mentioning tonight that we were able to tell the community about last night. So we'll wait for you to pop that in the Q&A for us.
In the meantime, Neil, Molly has another question. What about the gate at the north end by the school? Is that planned to be gated still? So I don't know who would like to take that one.
That's probably actually a Shanda question, but I believe that there's 2 gates. One is like an opening between the school property and the park, which we are going to be keeping. And I believe then there is a sort of double gate that's actually at the street frontage that the school controls, for which is not really part of this project. And as the school management changes from year to year, I understand that may or may not change, but that's sort of a bit beyond our control. But we can certainly find out from the school board what their intentions are with that gate, if that's the gate that Molly is referring to.
Okay, so following up here, so Molly says, I really like the risky play structures, but I would also like to see some accessible play structures, for example, wheelchair accessible, considering the mega school up the street.
Sorry. Can you hear me now? Yeah, so great suggestion. Obviously, the city has to follow minimum standards for accessibility that are laid out by the province, and we do that on every project we tackle. Beyond the base level of accessibility, which is intended to allow sort of all participants essentially access to the same experience, we can add additional elements and do different design approaches to increase that inclusivity. So, and we're always striving to do that. We rarely try and hit the base. We always try and go at least a notch up. So there's a few additional opportunities. So we would definitely, we've taken that into consideration for this project already. I did want to mention that we, as one of council's strategic directions, we owe your council and city residents a report in 2025 on the level of accessibility in all of the playgrounds. I think we have 117 or 18 playgrounds in the city. We owe sort of like a review of that back to council, and then some recommendations about how and if we should change that and make it better, more accessible, and improve the inclusivity. So once we get that done, I think it will give us some good guidelines about the different sort of approaches. In some cases, highly inclusive playgrounds, are possible to be built. They're generally much larger, more expensive, and typically a municipality might only have one or two of those. And then there's a sort of a whole bunch of tiers of levels of inclusivity in playgrounds, including the most basic issue is that, perhaps, I don't want to issue a number online now, but maybe a third to half of our playgrounds don't even have pathways to them. There's a really key accessibility issue that we're going to have to be addressing. We have sand in some of our playgrounds. So all of those things are going to be addressed citywide, and then we'll have kind of a citywide strategy. I will say that the newer parks that we're doing are going to be in much better shape than some of the older parks. So we're trying to keep that next study in mind when we're doing the parks over the next couple of years, so that we think we'll line up with the result of that study. But yes, comment well heard. Thank you for that.
Okay, thanks, Neil. So I have a comment here from Ali. My concern is that pretty much every playground in Kingston is a carbon copy of the other playgrounds. Can we have a playground that maybe supports some risky play or some alternatives to the existing options? There are something like 8 playgrounds within walking distance, which is great, but they're all pretty much the same. I don't need 8 different identical playgrounds within walking distance. There is no meaningful choice. Do you want the blue one or the yellow one? 1, 2 slides or 3? I'd like to see some options that aren't available at other nearby parks. So I know we were talking a little bit earlier about risky play, some options. So Shanda, do you maybe want to start with that one?
Well, thank you for the feedback. We understand. We'll take a closer look at the other playgrounds in the area and assess that. And it would be really beneficial if people provide more feedback ahead of time as to what exactly they don't like. Those kind of things, or even provide stories of how your kid uses the place. It really helps us to further, I guess, progress on the design, the why, rather than just like an example of a location. I don't know if I answered all the questions.
All right, thanks, Shandon. Thanks, Ali, for that feedback. Very helpful. Not seeing any other questions in our Q&A box here. So if anybody has any other questions, feel free to drop it in now. Okay, Elizabeth is asking, will there be pickleball lines drawn on the tennis court? So, I don't know, Kevin or Shanda, if you want to handle that one.
No, there will not be pickleball lines on this tennis court. Primarily pickleballs are usually a noisy sport, and because of the location of the court being very close to residents, it's really it presents itself as presenting issues because we've had this in other parks where it's too close and we had pickleball lines, and there's a lot of noise concerns from residents when they are too close to the residents.
Okay, thanks, Shanda. Lydia has a question. Oh, sorry, Neil, go ahead.
Hi, yeah. Just on the pickleball court supply, we often hear every time we tackle a new park that there's interest in this new activity. It's just the greatest game, and we're big boosters of it. And we are currently building pickleball courts in the east and in the center and in the west part of the city. So there is going to be a lot more pickleball courts available for Kingston residents. We are also adding more pickleball lines to some of the existing courts where there is that good separation to homes. We recently did some in Compton Park, just south of here. Polson Park is slated to also get some pickleball lines. And I think
It
that
already has one.
Oh, and it does. Sorry, I might have got those backwards. Anyways, the point is that strategy can be found. You can either reach out to Shanda and she can provide you a map showing that strategy, or we might even be able to drop it in the chat here. We can go online and find the Parks and Recreation Master Plan the council approved about where the pickleball courts would go in the city. So there was a lot of kind of pre-planning to make sure that they would be in successful locations. And future courts would go in Shannon Park, which would be also fairly close to this location. So just a little bit more background. If you want more information on pickleball, please reach out to us.
Okay, thanks everyone. Another question from Lydia. Can you tell us a bit more about the gathering space? How many tables or seats might be available in that space? Thanks, Lydia.
We can answer that. So what we'd be doing is providing a fairly large shade structure, and below that shade structure, we would, program in, potentially a picnic table or two, or some benches. Obviously this is a very popular space, and by providing a new playground, we want to make sure that we provide enough cover for parents, even children that are taking a break. So, we'd provide a suitable number of benches and places for residents to sit, maybe have a coffee or a sandwich.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. No questions in the queue right now. So if you have any other burning questions or thoughts, feel free to drop them in the Q&A function. We'll give that another minute. And for anyone who's interested, Neil's dropped the Parks Recreation Master Plan in the chat there if you want to take a look at that link following the meeting. Page 87 says. Okay, so not seeing any other questions coming in, but don't forget, you can always reach out to us after the fact. So thank you again to everyone for participating. Before you sign off tonight, we'd like to ask you to complete an evaluation poll to let us know how we did tonight. While the poll is up, I have a couple more notes to cover. So the first is that we'll invite you to visit Get Involved Kingston to add your comments to the online survey that we've mentioned a few times. It's open until April 4th at 4 p.m. Next, input from this engagement session and the survey will be shared on the Get Involved project page once the survey is closed. If you've signed up to receive updates about this project, you'll be notified when it's live on the site. If you're not receiving any notifications, you can reach out to Shanda and be asked to be added to the project list. If you're already part of the project list, you will receive updates about this project. Okay, thank you again, everyone, for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate it. Thank you again.